Welcome, Planet Underground's to Stakeholder Roundtable, live from CGA Summer Committee meetings in Park City, Utah. We have a live audience here as well as many watching a LinkedIn live stream. Please submit any questions you have via the live stream. I'm Jimmy Wang with BizMetrics, and we have a fine panel here. Let's have a quick introduction, please, starting with Bill.
Here's Bill Riggs. I'm work with Right Side locating Google Fiber, and locating industry about 17.
Hi, I'm Chris Russ, Director of Government Affairs at USIC. I've been in the locating industry for 32 years.
My name is Sean Haley, 15 years of experience in the locating industry. Started out as co-founder of LineQuest, and right now I'm Chief Strategy Officer for Gridhawk Holdings.
Bob Bryant with Urban. I've been with Urban for about 4 years, and prior to that, I've been in technology for around 15. Before that, about 20 some odd years in the locating industry.
I'm Tom Hall with Cortera, Vice President of Business Development at Cortera, and I've been in the damage prevention industry and Cortera for 15 years.
Brian Thomas, CTO with Arc Ventures. I've been in the damage prevention industry for about the past 15 years and telecommunications and communications role.
Great. So it seems like we have a combined about 500 years of experience here. So here's the question. As the law stands, there's no limit to how many tickets a contractor can call into the 811 system. The locators must complete these tickets within the legal timeline. How much does unconstrained volume contribute to the industry's stagnant damage prevention results? Feel free to jump in, anyone.
Well, nobody's speaking up. They're looking at each other going, jump in. But this is a huge issue in the industry because there's not a way to staff for an unknown. I mean, you could have a million tickets and called in one day. And how do you staff for that if last year's volume was 500,000?
Yeah, I agree. I think I remember being back in operations. I used to tell contractors that would complain about our staffing, well, if you tell me what the volume's going to be on January 15th of 2026, I'll be ready. But we don't know from day to day, particularly when projects come up that aren't planned. We don't know about them until all of a sudden we get 300 tickets called in the same day, some of them the entire scope of the project. You can't mark that in a legal 48 or 72-hour time frame.
Yeah, I think all industries go through a phase of maturity, and the damage prevention industry sure is at one of those inflection points here within the last 5 years, where there has to be a thought of how do we flex with the times, if you will. If you look at the history of any organization or just events such as, like, for instance, the internet, it starts off usually as the Wild West, then it slowly gets more, I don't want to say regulated, but controlled to some degree. I think recently, and again, where we sit, we have a unique position at Cortera to view kind of both sides of the aisle, is there has to be something that has to be done, not only at the call center level, but also at the pre-planning level in order to help those folks downstream affect better outcomes in the field. And unless there's something that happens in that way, and if there's just resistance, maybe based on whatever means there might be, then the outcomes are only going to get more and more negative. And unfortunately, as I think someone said in the previous panel, things are going to be taken over from a regulatory perspective because the government itself isn't going to allow things to get out of hand, if you will, especially if it's threatening infrastructure.
Right. Yeah, there might be 10 tickets that I need to call in as an excavator, but I might only have crews to support 3 of them. And so I'm really trying to get today's work and tomorrow's work. Well, that's 6. Why did I call in the extra 4? So if we can think about this as a community and acknowledge the fact that if I only call the 6 in, it's easier for locators to get the 6 done than it is for them to get the 10 done.
And I think there's a common misconception of what's expected of a locator and what's actually possible. I've been on, I was a pipeline layer before. I was a pipeliner, and I could care less what the locators, said. My job was to lay the pipe. Your job is to find all the lines before I lay the pipe. So I've kind of been on both sides. So I'm in a unique position in knowing that the pressures of actually laying the facility and then the pressures of finding the facility, but there's definitely a misconception of what's expected and what's actually possible.
And I'll go back to what Tom said about the regulator, but we talk about government. A lot of these grants that are coming out, they have these deadlines on them that aren't feasible. So yeah, the regulators and PHMSA, we want damage prevention, but the side of the house that's trying to deploy this fiber, they put these unrealistic deadlines. And for example, you go to a county where you got one locator, normally you get 10 tickets a day, and now there's 20 boring crews. How do you mark that in 48 or 72 hours without, 6 months notice so we can recruit, hire, train?
Well, we have someone on the panel here that is probably closest to us than any one of us is at this point. Bill, what are your thoughts on that?
I kind of see it both ways. I see it from the contractor's standpoint. Got a large project, they want to get it marked out, they want to see where all the utilities are. They tend to overcall their tickets. They bring on subs, and the subs are calling in tickets. And so really what happens in that process is they're able to get the locator back on site every other day to remark the 6,000 feet. And if you're a locator and you're running around with, just say 40 tickets, and this one ticket's going to take you an hour, 2 hours to remark, it tends to create the problem of hurry up. When you talk about damage prevention, you start getting under the gun, start going too fast. You don't follow your policies and your procedures, and you start bleeding off and not recognizing it. And so I understand the contractor needs those marks. Again, what can the locator really provide in a given day? Quite a bit, but then not enough. So,
And as I look at this, I see it in one of the entities that I think would be great to have included today, and maybe we just couldn't get them, was an excavator. To go, how do you handle this workload when it comes across your desk? And having talked to many of them where they say, well, we call it in, but because of inconsistencies of the past, we facilitate and empower our employees to put in more ticket requests than they're actually going to work, because we know that the locator is only going to get to 3 out of the 10. So, but if we call in 10, we're going to get 30%. So we feel really good about that, not knowing where that excavator wants to start. So they show up at the wrong job, and the crew's not there. They mark this out, and the crew's, we're not going to be there for 2 weeks, or you hear different stories. And so hearing it from the excavator side, I think is an important aspect. And they're also often overlooked in the 811 system as just the user, the facilitator of the work that we often do. And I look at the excavator as playing a really important role in some of the things that are coming out, and they're going to help us move the needle on some of these things, because I guarantee you that what's happened in the past 3 years has significantly changed what happened 10 years ago.
We have a question from an audience member, I think an excavator. Name, company, and what you do, please.
Scott Hattenberg, M&L Construction, and there we go. Scott Hattenberg, M&L Construction. Been in excavation all my life, 2nd generation. My kids are taking over on the 3rd generation. We do everything from heavy civil, commercial, solar farms, and fiber. So one thing I wanted to bring up and ask the question is, why don't we really talk to the project owners? Because that's where it gets driven from. And I think that was a really good question about the BEAD grant funds and the NEDA grant funds, because now we have liquidated damages. So we have to go. And that is part of the problem we have. Or we have these, I don't know what you call them, fiber optic companies out there that are trying to slam in fiber, get stuff in. They are dealing with an issue where they want to turn over X amount of houses so that they can sell it to BlackRock. They have these investors that are waiting in line. So once it's turned over, then all of a sudden it gets bought. Now the question becomes, how do we get this to a point, and I know some things have happened in our area that might be important, but how do we get that back to the municipalities to say, when you permit it, we need to have a sit down? And one of the things that did happen, I'll give you this, it's not a question, but one of the things that did happen after a large fiber build kind of started in North Idaho, and everything got blown up, and exactly what you said, they brought in 30, 40 drill crews. They kept coming to me saying, because we've been doing it since 1992, and they came to me and they said, do you want to help? And I'm like, not at that price. I can't do that.
Right.
And so then when it came into Spokane, they started kind of with the same model, and the city of Spokane, Spokane Valley, and the county got together and said, no, we're not doing this. You get X amount, you finish it, and then you move on. And it really helps. So how do we get that through to the municipalities when they get a franchise from a project owner, say in fiber? How do we get through to them to say, this is a better process?
Yeah, one thing about that is usually those municipalities are also facility owners. So how do I protect myself from myself is a great question. The issue we were talking about, tickets aren't the same. So that ticket that's being called in by the fiber contractor isn't Mrs. Jones planting petunias, where it's going to take me 2 minutes to do the locate. It's going to take me a day or more to do everything that I need to do. How do you regulate? How do you manage? How do I staff? How do I accurately mark? How do I do all these things? And all of them involve stakeholders along the way. And if those stakeholders aren't on the same page, you mentioned Idaho is on one page and Washington is on a different page, and you see varying results from each, right? So how do I get the Washington methodology out there and apply it to Idaho? And I think the point of that is meetings such as this, where we can go in there and openly talk about the problems and openly try and figure out solutions for those problems. And if those conversations don't exist, the problems are going to persist.
Yeah, I think you have to go to the source of control too, which
Right.
is it goes to the regulators within the state, and then the call centers, frankly speaking, have to get more proactive on this, because it can't just be ticket in, ticket out, right? I mean, that's just irresponsible. And then the regulators have to understand what's going on in their state, and as opposed to being just a punitive agency and an agency that's looked at as coming down on maybe all stakeholders, they have to get involved and say, hey, these municipalities that aren't as proactive, maybe, I mean, help yourself, help us as a state here, so that we can get out in front of what we know are negative trends in the industry. And I think it was talked about in the data committee yesterday. The data's there. As Louis Panzer was saying in North Carolina, they could pull the data and analyze it in any way that someone may want in order to get in front of these things, to forecast. There's checks and balances, such as what you brought up, that could be put into place before the stuff hits the road and anything gets destroyed. And hey, let's take a step back and talk about this. And that's what needs to happen. And unfortunately, again, it's uncomfortable to say, people don't want to have those uncomfortable conversations, I don't think, because a lot of times it takes time and money. But what are you saving in the upfront as opposed to downstream?
And I think to your point, the owner of that project, they're hiring a contractor to put it in. They either have in-house or they're hiring contract locators to do it. They got a project, they got to manage that project. Some of the, you mentioned Google, and there's some others out there who come in with projects, and they have a project manager with daily sheets of where they're going to be, and there's communication along the whole process. And they meet with you months in advance, let you know it's coming. They let you know where they're going to be, and they ask, what can you do? City, power company, whomever, contract locator. And then to your point on the 811s, I've sat on some boards of directors, and a lot of times you find 811s from their legal counsel saying the law says we will receive the tickets. So they're going to receive it. They're not going to turn a ticket down, because their job legally, particularly if they're a nonprofit, is to just receive those tickets. That's why it's got to be more in the law, I think, to have structure on that.
I agree with you, but I also think that there comes a point where there's the lack of ingenuity at times on the board going, well, we can't charge for a ticket. Well, what type of ticket can't you charge for? and what type of ticket can you charge for. You know, you don't want to charge grandma for planting her petunias, but it's somebody who comes in and drops 1,000 tickets as an excavator, is it reasonable to say back to them, this type of project takes a certain amount of work, so maybe there's a project fee
Well,
involved?
but unfortunately, in the most of the laws, it states that the excavator will not pay for those services. So, you know, I think it's fundamentally going to have to be law changes.
But could it, well, and I don't disagree, but maybe there is a point where they could come back and say this is a premium service.
Yeah, managed services is I think it's the future on these projects, and it ought to be included in the funding by the facility operator.
Absolutely.
So on the point of lack of ingenuity, Brian, I once brought up to 811 president, I'm like, hey, it'd be great if people can submit tickets more than 48 hours before they're due. So, so the locators have a better idea of what volume is coming down the pike, right? And his response was, well, legally, any ticket submitted has to be due in 48 hours. And, you know, I don't run an 811 center, but within a few seconds, I'm like, okay, what if they can submit a pre-ticket? So it's not a ticket, it's a pre-ticket that automatically converts to a ticket 48 hours before they're going to start work, right? So then again, the locators can see the volume. And that blew his mind, right? This is not a rocket science idea, right? But that blew his mind. But is there not enough ingenuity and creativity in this industry, and where people kind of use the law as a shield to not have to do or think hard enough?
Go ahead.
Oh, Pennsylvania actually has, it's essentially a project ticket. And so as an excavator on a major fiber rebuild, for instance, I call in a project ticket. All of the stakeholders in that area will come in, we'll meet, we'll talk. I will tell you where I'm going, when I'm going, how fast I'm going. And all of the stakeholders then would have buy-in about how I'm going to then manage that one ticket. They then, the excavator then will call in individual actual excavation tickets based on the feedback that they got. And what that ends up doing is I'm going to call in the work that I need today, maybe tomorrow, and I'm going to get something that's appropriate for what my activities are going to be. And I'm also going to probably get marks on the ground, because instead of me calling in a mile, I've called in 500 feet. And it seems to be a process that has been working for those areas where they're utilizing that kind of process.
Right. And I would say I do know some various states that have the capability to take the tickets in early, and they put it in as a scheduled work. And through that scheduled process, I believe enforcement, as long as those are completed by the dates, they're not getting the complaints, and the enforcement isn't coming back. Some of that's changing because of laws coming out of DC with PHMSA, but you know, if I recall correctly, Pelican's got a really robust system that some of the 811 systems use, and their system is set up to be able to allow some of that work scheduling. And it did phenomenal work in those areas where they were at. And it also helped those locators. But sometimes that information doesn't make it to the locator. It gets stopped at a system process much higher up in some of the locate companies that are doing that work, because they're managing it for their field, because they don't want the field to be able to manage it. And so there's multiple bottlenecks out there that were areas that can create a bottleneck, in my opinion. But I do believe that there's those possibilities, and we're starting to see, especially more in the telecom and some of those other areas, relaxation to go, okay, this is when the work's been scheduled, they're completed by the unscheduled time. Unfortunately, the amount of work that's coming through continues to overwhelm.
The point brought up is technology can, if allowed, could handle with some of handle some of this. I know that we were talking about, Brian. There is the ability, if the states allowed it, to enhance their own tools or allowed third-party tools to where you can have pre-scheduled events that are scheduled either to auto-submit or manually submit on the date you want to, which is 48 hours or before you want to do that. There's a way to then, and so that's a ticket that's in holding status. It's not even, not even submitted or anything, but there's a way to get a view into that so that people can see, okay, what's coming down the pike as opposed to what is actually in play today. So you can have the ability to forecast potentially, or show a forecast of what to expect from what you see as scheduled. And so technology, and on the other end too, technology can really help locating companies, organizations dealing with the outcome of the tickets, because not every ticket's the same. Technology certainly can help analyzing the ticket, saying, okay, this is a larger job, this is a much easier job, so that you now have the ability to deploy the resources effectively for your crews, no matter, again, if it's internal or externally done.
And not only is not every ticket the same, not every state's the same.
Right.
You got states that are 48 hours, you got straight 48 states, you got 72-hour states,
Right.
North Carolina. Like what you said, New Mexico has a similar planning project type ticket there. So, I mean, I think it's going to take, I know regulatory working on some states trying to move up those conditions, but I think it's just going to take us continuing to work together to try to get those states the same.
Yeah, I agree. And some of the states, North Carolina's law goes into effect October 1st, and they changed it to where you can call in advance, and the ticket will be due at the work date. So it won't, they'll transmit it as soon as it comes in. But I think that's good, but fundamentally, we got to get to the process of getting good tickets. It doesn't matter if you called in 10 days in advance. If you're going to call in 300 tickets that you're not going to do in the life of the ticket, we update tickets. Why are tickets being updated if there's no work that's started on that ticket? So, unfortunately, a lot of the states, there's no enforcement on the ticket calling practices. There's no enforcement on, did they complete the ticket in the life of the ticket? But if you're late by a minute from a positive response, there's enforcement to the facility operators.
But that's the only part that's legislated.
Right.
Is that 72 or 48.
Right.
The rest of it, there's no legislation. So,
well, they're changing them. Mississippi has some language that says it's enforceable. You cannot call in more than you can do in the life of the ticket. And, you cannot call, when you update, you can't update work that's already been completed on that project. I mean, we have all been in the business. There's states that we get tickets for a year and the work's been done because there's been someone told in the office every 15 days, you got to call in a new ticket until they're communicated back with, we're done with that project.
What's the penalty if someone does that in Mississippi?
Well, right now, I believe the maximum penalty is $2,500. It starts out with training, then it's $500 and it moves up. But I haven't seen it. But of course, I don't have visibility to all enforcement. Unfortunately, I do on the late tickets. But it's something that they can hold people accountable, and we're going to follow those. I mean, Jimmy, you and I, we had a conversation last night. We need to track when law changes happen and what the effects of those law changes were, so that we can prove the things that worked in other states, and the things that didn't work, maybe we tweak it before we change it in another state. That's right.
Absolutely, because again, it goes back to, I think laws can certainly, regulations can certainly be influenced and changed, but that is a tortoise, right? I think you heard this morning with Blue Stake saying, oh, we opened the laws first time since 2011. Great, yeah, congratulations. So that is going to be very, very slow change. I think what you have to do, and I think the comment that Jimmy made is very revealing, and it's an important one, is I think what happens a lot of times is people hide behind the laws because it's convenient, right? Oh, I'm doing what we can, and that goes with the regulator and the call center. And I think people have to start saying, okay, working within the regulations that we have now, how can we influence better outcomes? We can't just sit here and really have the same things happen and happen and happen. We've all seen the numbers. We've had tons of conversations, like all of us have a ton of experience in this industry. How much has changed in the last 10, 15 years? Some things, but not seismic by any means, right? I've had this same conversation 12 years ago. Ticket volumes are a little bit different now because, again, we got a lot of funding from the government recently coming out that's affected this. A lot of technology has driven it. But how has it been reacted to? And really, it's the members, us and other participating members have to pressure the people that really control this, which frankly speaking are the centers who can do a better job and the regulators. And they can help with this. They can within the confines of the law. They just have to have the gumption to do so, so to
Well,
speak.
I'm going to redefine your centers as the utilities because there's no difference from my point of view, because the utilities run the 811 centers and they have all of the voting seats, and there might be other seats on those boards, but they're not voting seats. The voting seats are held by the utilities.
Some states they are.
Right. But a majority. I mean, out of 59 centers, I think probably most of them are handled by the utilities. And I think they have a lot more at stake than just what we see from the 811 system. And so it often creates a drag.
So just to clarify for the audience and people watching, is the challenge the high volume? Because too often we say, hey, there's the high locate volume. Is it actually the high volume, or is it the unpredictable and dramatically changing, varying volume over a short period of time? I mean, what is harder?
It's both. It's a little bit of both. So, I mean, I look back at the hiring. So the hiring is our bottleneck. We've got to hire, we've got to train, we've got to get these guys ready to we can't just grab a guy. I could grab you probably, but I could grab you too, but I can't just grab a random person and put them out in the field. I mean, it's going to take 30, 60, 90 days of training.
Easy.
Before sometimes some of those projects are done by the time you get enough people in there to actually make a difference.
Well, agreed. I mean, I made a comment earlier in this panel presentation, but forecasting would be the key. And, it's maybe not ideal and we're probably not going to get there, but if there were limits and there was some accountability for all parties involved, not just the members who are paying for the tickets, that could change the process and eliminate some of the noise, if you'd like to say, that sometimes gets in the tickets.
I agree with you, Chris and Sean. I think that part of it is, trying to staff up. But then if we could forecast or take last year's numbers and say, okay, here's a reasonable expectation to say, this county, and I'll pick a county in Michigan that I'm familiar with, Houghton County, Houghton Hancock, you can only increase your ticket load by 10% for the coming year unless you have forecasted that at a greater level and have that limited into the 811 system. You reach your limit today for this county, they can't increase. And the reason I say that is because the technician driving to that county, it doesn't matter what company they're working for, they're driving 3 hours one way to go locate a single ticket. So to put that and to go, well, you could have an unlimited amount of tickets come up, and in 72 hours, you have 100 tickets. You're not going to get enough guys out there to locate when there's 3 hours of windshield time one way.
And even with that, the forecasting with the rural development of the fiber, even with good forecast numbers, if you don't know where they're going to be, it's easy to do in Dallas, Fort Worth. Have a large amount of locators, but all of a sudden, if we're in a rural county where there's one locator that drives over there, even if you forecasted there'd be a 10% increase year over year for the state, did you know it was going to be in that county where you don't have folks?
All right, thank you. We have a question from the audience here. Please name, company name, and what you do.
Dwayne Rogers, CEO, Pelican Corp. Don't want to throw anyone under the bus. Virginia had a project, so I'm not sure if any of you guys locate in Virginia. So if you do,
No.
okay, good. So they had a rural project, one of the schemes to roll fiber into the rural areas. That project, I sat on a panel 2 years ago talking about this process. They told them 6 months ahead, so it's not one of you guys, so you can comment. 6 months ahead, this project was rolling out. They were really upfront about where they're going to roll out, guess what? The biggest problem in the project, late locates. So I sort of get what you're saying. I get the problem with the Monday morning 300 tickets. But when you get a real job like that where you have to move guys and you know a project's coming, how do you manage that? And obviously the company that did this stuff, that's locating for Virginia, out in rural Virginia, couldn't do it. So they could have employed guys 6 months, 12 months out and ramped it up, but it's commercial, right? You know, you don't have guys sitting there waiting for this stuff to come. So how do you manage that when you do know there's a project coming?
Yeah, I think one of the things to point out as well is that that project that you're talking about is a project. And those large tickets are probably 20 to 25% of the total ticket volume that comes in. 75%, let's say, of the volume are other things. So as a locator, I still have to deal with 100%, not necessarily just the 25% that's being called in by projects. So that variability of volume is kind of a foundational problem that's going to be inherent everywhere, not necessarily just Virginia, but every single place that you go to, it's going to be out there. And you just don't know the volume on a day-to-day basis. You can look at history, but today doesn't mean it's the same as last year plus 10%. It means it's today. And it could be 100% more today, but 200% less tomorrow. And that variability is impossible to predict.
Well, I think if you're given the notice that Dwayne is talking about, I really think it's an indictment on the organizations that are participating in it, because if they had the forecast, especially the forefront, you can potentially, and again, you can't get, nothing's 100%, but you can now start working directly with the affected party to say, hey, all right, let's align on this. Let's have a weekly meeting, bi-monthly meeting, whatever made sense based on the project, so that you can get out in front of the known. The unknown is always going to affect every one of us, but hopefully that's the 10% as opposed to the 50% or whatever it might be. And if that's I think the outcome everyone would hope, similar to what you were talking about, right? And that's kind of what we're saying. Who promotes that? Who says that, hey, we have to do this every time? Or, as a state, some states are more proactive. We're going to get in front of this. We know this is affecting our members. We can't throttle tickets. We can't do anything as far as affecting the ticket intake. But what we can do is we can make sure people understand what our expectations are before that project hits, so that when you start submitting tickets, we have kind of a agreed upon nature in which you're going to be doing that.
I was talking to an 811 executive director on Monday, and in our conversation, we were talking about differences in one-call tickets. Why are they so dissimilar, if that's a word, unsimilar across the country? And we were going through some of the things, and he goes, I've done the studies, I've got data here. And he goes, well, the safest time frame for a dig ticket through this study, and he goes, I've studied every state that would allow me to get the data, 72-hour ticket. You take that out here to the floor and say, here's a best practice, because we have proven data that it's 72 hours is better than 48. 10 years from now, we'll talk about it, because nobody's going to make that progress, because they're too afraid it's going to impact their build times or other things. So, and then you have the utilities on the boards that are saying, we're not ready to make that jump, because I may offend somebody at my corporation because I go and make this change. That impact their build times for their gas build, their fiber build, their electric build. So they're looking at their time frames going, if I make a change like that, it's going to impact my business, and I'm going to have to talk to somebody at a higher level than I really don't want to have to talk to. And understandable. But to be able to come back and say, this is a best practice, that's a different story. Just because it's the best practice doesn't means it needs to be implemented. But I think the enforcement bodies can say, why aren't you following the best practice?
Thank you. So earlier in the conversation, Brian, you said excavators are often overlooked in the 811 system. Why is that? Who is the customer of the 811 system?
The customer, I mean, you know, from my point of view, it's going to be the utility or the DOT or those entities, because they're spending the most amount of time. If I'm putting in a flower garden, I'm the customer because I'm putting that flower garden in. The rest of us are all working through a utility or a DOT or another entity to make money.
Well, I think the question is who right now is the customer and then who should be the customer, right? I think the general public should be the customer, right? I mean, that's why the process is there.
But who is the customer right now?
Well, the customer, I think I would have to agree with Brian, is the utilities, because the utilities influence the boards, which influence the regulations and laws in the states, and what have you. So, I mean, again, it's not speaking ill, but people have, change is hard, right? Change costs money sometimes. But who does the analysis as far as if you're going to say, okay, we're not going to make the change here, we're going to accept the risk downstream and the cost of that risk, well, then stop complaining about it, right? You've accepted it. I don't think anyone wants that because that affects other folks potentially. Something could go boom and hurt people and or cut off critical infrastructure. So why would you allow that to happen, right? So that's why I think the purpose of today's discussion and many others is how do we always progress things to be better when we actually see how things play out in the real world? You can't just turn a blind eye to them.
So does anyone disagree that the utilities are the customers?
I think the customer is the excavator. The benefactor are the utilities and the public. And so as a customer, I am calling in to make sure that when I excavate, I have everything out in front of me so I can make an informed decision about what I do, when I do, how I do. The benefactor is by having those locates done, my facilities are safe and the public potentially is safer because of that.
But most customers in America are paying for something.
Right.
So it's hard to say. I know where you're heading.
No, the customer by definition is someone who pays for a product or service.
That's why it has to
Which
be
is why.
utility.
So
Yep.
the customer of who pays for the 811 system?
The members,
Yep,
The members,
exactly.
the utilities.
That's exactly
so the
Okay.
operators.
So the utilities are the customers of the system. Right? I mean, that's by definition.
Yeah,
Who
absolutely.
gets the output of the system?
There is no call center if there are no calls.
Well, who receives the output of the system right now? It's the contractors.
The contractor.
The paint on the ground or some information about where facilities are or not.
Right.
So isn't that disconnect a huge part of the problem, that the customers of the system are very different than the recipients of the output of the system?
It's the point of what we've been talking. It's the root cause.
I mean, isn't that the root cause of like 90% of these challenges?
Yeah, and that's why, frank discussions have to be made. But I see someone's utility owner sitting in the question chair right now.
Well, and I'm a locator, so I know who pays me.
Yeah.
So
Right?
I'm
Who's
out
your
there
customer?
locating, but
Who's your customer?
my customer is the facility owner.
Okay.
So-
So your customer is a facility owner. The customer of the entire system is a facility owner. Yet you're producing a product. So are you, Chris. Yet you're producing a product. So are you, Bill. You're producing a product for the caller who is not your customer. I mean, there's a misalignment of interest there, isn't there?
That's one way to look at it, yes.
Yeah.
All right, we have a question from an audience member. Please name, company name, what you do.
Myers. I'm with Spire. I also sit on the board of Missouri 811. So these are good conversations. The people in this room is very smart. I do appreciate that. But, in the opening comments of CGA yesterday, Sarah was up there, and you could see that she was a little disgruntled or upset that we're not going to meet our 50 and 5 goal, right? Which, it was a lofty goal to begin with, but we have to have a starting point. And this is a relevant conversation because I think we kind of sit here and we talk about a lot of relevant things, but really what is the root, right? There is a massive amount of tickets. There's not a massive amount of people coming into this industry, right? And we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot because we're pushing them out of the industry because of the high stress. Full disclosure, I was a locator for 17 years. I loved it, right? I don't know if I could operate under today's pressure, right? But now I'm on the operator side, so I'm in charge of trying to manage these locate contracts, make sure that I meet the requirements within the law, I satisfy my regulators and all that. But I think there was a lot of discussion here today, but I think at the 811 board levels, we need to have this conversation, because you're right, the utilities set on these boards, we do have some voting members that are not utilities, which is absolutely fantastic, because you get their voice, but those are the people that generally do it right, okay?
Right.
Those people sitting on the boards.
Like
But-
you, Ellen, you guys obviously do it right, yeah.
Well, thank you. I mean, I try, but I'm passionate about this. I've been in this industry 28 years, some of you have more than I do, but I guess my question is, can we achieve 50 and 5 without some radical change to the system, such as, I know it's been brought up here, but load leveling, ticket throttling, whatever you want to call it, because if we get down to the nuts and bolts of it, it's safety. Right? I heard an excavator say the other day that he's having a hard time finding skilled labor. Well, the locators are having a hard time finding skilled labor. We as utilities is having a hard time finding the skilled labor. But I think, again, we shoot ourselves in the foot because of the pressure that we put on people day in, day out, unrealistically. I said at my board meeting at Missouri 811 that let's not kid ourselves. You're a locator. I was a locator. People will make decisions because they have to have a quality of life. Until we start addressing the ticket volumes and everybody sits in a room and has a tough conversation, I don't think we get there. But my question to you, can we get there without some sort of radical change?
No, because the plan has to be made, right? Like any other plan, organizationally or otherwise, you say, okay, here's our goal in 5 years. Here are the milestones we need to hit each quarter, each year in order to reach that goal. And then you have the stakeholders that are affected by that goal get together and say, okay, how are we going to meet these milestones? And there's obviously certain ways to do that depending on what the goal is, and they're pretty crystal clear typically, and you chart that path so everyone has the same common understanding of where you're headed.
And I'm going to say that depending on the size of your organization, change is on a scale. Change for a small organization is much easier than it is for a large organization. So as we scale that change across a organization that's 100 people to an organization that's 100,000 people, now the cost of that scale is exponentially changing. And so to understand some of the costs, some of the ramifications of some of the utilities, I completely understand. But to your question, can we have a change or not change the current setup and accomplish new goals? There's no possible, because it's not designed for that. It's not designed for today's environment. It's designed for 30 years ago. And that's not a slight at anybody. And it's not a slight at the utility owners. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the utility owners and what they're trying to accomplish in our communities. But I think that we need to go, okay, what needs to change from 30 years to now? And be willing to say, this is going to hurt, but we're going to do it quickly. Because I've sat in some of our meetings and I'm going to go back a couple of years ago, a best practice was discussed, and I'm like, that's 5 years ago. And the next practices that were being discussed, I'm like, that should be today's best practice, but it's going to leave the next practice committee to go to the best practice committee, and then by the time it makes it through, it's out of date. Our world is moving so much faster. We see it in the workload that we have and what we're trying to accomplish, workload of our customers in our communities. They don't want to wait for broadband to be delivered 10 years from now. I mean, nobody wants to wait for fiber to get to their house in 10 years.
And I would say, is it possible? Yes. Can you do it based on how you're doing things today? I don't think that's realistic. We have customers, multiple customers that have had double-digit damage rate reductions in 2024. And they do that with a process. You have 100 tickets that come in. There's 2 or 3 of those tickets that are absolutely going to have a damage on it. What do I do to mitigate the risk of that 2 or 3? I can't handle 100. but I can do something about 2 or 3. I can do something about 5. I can do something about 10. How do I mitigate the risk of those 2, 5, 10 tickets? What do I do in order to enact some type of change that allows me to take the highest risk ticket and mitigate those risks? Can you? Yes. And if you're not going to take additional steps beyond what's being done with the process today, it's an unrealistic goal that is not going to be achieved. You have to do something more. You have to enact change.
I think a lot of utility companies, just like a lot of organizations, have silos, and you have this damage prevention organization, and that is their job, prevent damages. But then you have this budget or procurement team that's trying to get the best rate for a service from either an excavator, a locator, whoever it is, and they don't take into account. Yes, they may put some, in the SOW, they may put some, guidelines. You have to hit certain metrics, but if it's truly about damage prevention and safety, I mean, technically that's priceless. What can we do to change to where it's not a burden anymore?
So on that note, Bill, I'd like to hear from you because the rest of these guys, myself included, our office guys, or they were ex-field workers, locators. As a locator, as a current present locator, what changes would you recommend that would help you help protect the communities that you work in better? Like any changes off the top of your head, maybe regarding to what we've talked about or something else?
I think a lot of it was hit on. I think, getting 811 consistent in all states would be really beneficial because that is very different. And then enforcing just what you have. I see that as a locator. Like, Utah they changed their legal ticket dates from 14 days to 21. And then now when somebody calls in a ticket and they're updating it, they're asked, are you excavating? Are you continuing excavating? And they make a statement, yes, we're continuing excavation. It's taken longer than we thought. But really, it's the 811 operator's name that's testifying to the fact that they're still continuing excavation. So these tickets just keep rolling in. I keep going to the same jobs over and over and over. With Roger, who owns Right Side Locating, I think one of the greatest things he's got going for the locating side of it is the culture he's building. We know it takes about 30 locators to deal with 150,000 tickets. And it's the culture. He's really ingrained the culture of getting in there and communicating with these contractors and trying to get the best thing. But we don't as a locator, I don't like communicating with the contractor, honestly. They called in a scope. I've seen it too much over the years where, with good intentions, they say, yeah, we don't need this marked, we just need this. And then, the fire hydrant starts leaking, nobody's thinking about it. They run over there, dig it up to replace it, and they hit a utility. And then you're the one on the hook as a locator because they had a ticket that covered that scope. And, no agreement was documented or whatever happened there. I just personally would love to see 811 get very consistent and enforce what's sitting there. I know a lot of people that sit on these boards, I don't think locating seems to get represented in that, how we can help and how we can, I feel like I'm a part of the team on a project, a water line project. It's my job to get you through that project and mark my utilities accurately. I don't really get that credit. So I think there's just been a wealth of good points, and I think 811, that is the unknown, right? Like you say, tomorrow we can have 500 tickets, and we only got so much staff. There's no way to train somebody to pull somebody off the street to help us locate. I mean, we're just stuck with that. So I feel like 811, do sign utility companies up for a lot of liability sometimes that just physically can't be done.
What do you and your team do if, let's say on average, you and your team receive, I'm making this up, like 300 tickets a week, and then you show up Monday morning and here's 800 tickets. Like what can you explain to the audience what typically happens in that scenario?
Typically, we try to prioritize the tickets. You know, we know we got backbone on certain tickets, and so we try to get those type of tickets out of the way. We do a lot of calling with contractors to start facilitating when we can and what we can do, and it's a bit of a scramble. You know, we had a problem, a few weeks ago. There was, I think it was iCloud, somebody got hacked. It affected us. We were out of work for a day because all our services come through the cloud. We couldn't pull prints, we couldn't get tickets. That was a whole day behind. And so there was a lot of phone calling and scrambling to make up for that for us. And it worked. You know, we got great, I would say we got great relationships with contractors. You know, when we call, we try not to overpromise, underdeliver. We try to just really state what we can do for that day. And most of those contractors are willing to work with us and help us get through it.
So on that point of prioritization, and going back to what Bob said before, the idea of prioritizing, if you got 100 tickets and you can only do 30 today, right? The idea of prioritizing seems to make sense, and pretty much every other industry does this. But in this industry, at least when I talk to people, there's still a lot of people who are like, no, we shouldn't prioritize because every ticket is important. Every ticket is equally important. What is up with that? Like, how do we get people used to the idea that what Bill just said, the reality, I don't care what you think, but the reality is I cannot do 100. I'm doing 20, maybe 30 today, and I need to prioritize those. How do you get people around to that?
Yeah, and I think in general that if you look at those 100 tickets, based on the data that we've seen from our customers, roughly 20 to 25 of those 100 tickets are the ones that are going to result in some type of damage. So 25% of my ticket volume is accounting for 80 to 90% of all of my damages that are coming in. The latter part of that is from a risk perspective. The lower 10%, there's a almost 0% chance that those are actually going to result in a damage. So can I use data? Can I use a risk-based approach that says, look, if I'm going to be late, and I know I'm going to be late, I want to be late on the things that aren't going to have subsequent results coming back at me. So how do I prioritize my work such that if I'm only going to get to a certain percentage of those, I know that percentage are the lower risk ones that are extremely unlikely to result in any kind of damage event.
I think risk is definitely one way to look at it and prioritize for sure. And then I think the size and scope of the jobs are the other way to prioritize as well.
Sure.
Because not every ticket is equal. So I think you have to take in the risk first, is definitely probably the first priority, but then size and scope as an organization. How do I deploy my resources? Is this a ticket I'm going to need to communicate maybe more tightly with the excavator on because it's a large ticket and I need to make a plan on it? So certainly I think at a high level, technology can help you prioritize jobs in order to make sure that you can effectively deploy the resources that you have based on the jobs that are given and handle the spikes that may come down the realm and sift through them.
And I have a question for us as we think about it, because there was an earthquake yesterday, and people start talking about safety and different things like that. But what's the 100-year? Are we looking at are we planning for that 100-year situation? And I'm going to use an example. I had an excavator do exactly what we said. They got ahead of where they should have been, but they took a risk because they said it's residential. We're not going deep. Nobody's going to be impacted. But little did they know that the house they were digging outside of, the little old lady who lived in there was had a call alert. Her house goes down. She can't call for that emergency. So that 100-year plan that excavator might have had in place going, well, we've mitigated all the risks that we can see. There's risk out there that is unseen. And it's always going to be in existence. Some of these things we can't plan for.
And I think when the system gets overloaded, locators obviously use risk management to decide which tickets they're going to do. 100% of those tickets are enforceable from being on time.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Then you come to excavator and they have a deadline to get paid, to get the work done. They can't get marks. Now they're going to take a risk to get paid, but that risk isn't helping 50 and 5 because they're taking a risk. There was no paint when they done.
Yeah, so, we talk about safety and damages a lot in this industry, which is great. It's damage prevention industry. Do we talk about the waste and inefficiency in the system enough? And does that waste and inefficiency hinder the pursuit of safety? So just in this session, I heard tickets refreshed when they're not being done or when the project's already finished, tickets called in when not needed. I'm gonna call in 10 tickets when I actually only need 3. And I know other ones, like a huge percent of tickets are mark entire property when they're working on a quarter, an eighth, a 16th of a property. Is it important in the pursuit of safety to talk more about the waste and inefficiencies in the system, and do we do that enough?
Absolutely, it's important. I mean, I think the locators in-house and contractors, we talk about it. We want good tickets. The excavator, let's say John Plumbing over here is calling the entire property, and then he calls in 10 tickets. We don't get to one, but we said, both sides of the road. Why mark both sides of the road if you don't need both sides of the road? Locators got to walk back and forth for every line they're hooking up to. If they're doing communications, there could be 10 lines buried easily there. I think some states look at it, they talk about it, they point out, but the number one offender, unfortunately, in a lot of states for update tickets are the members, the utility owners. They've got a ticket for putting a service in. Why do you call that ticket in 3 times for a job that's going to take 3 hours? And then complain that you don't have marks on this backbone replacement. That's right. It's about getting good tickets. White line, help us know where you're going to dig.
Yeah.
That's a big one for us. As
That's
locators.
real. I experienced that. I was on a board of directors, and I had to talk to one of my peers because they consistently called in every Saturday night an emergency ticket for over a year for the same location or the same gas leak. But it was under a certain level, so it didn't need to be repaired. But they had to have it called in because they might need their crew to do something that weekend if they weren't busy. So
Classic example.
Exactly. And so I agree with you, Chris, in a story sort of way.
Yeah.
I would agree with the white line. I think that, when my time down in Nevada was my first kind of experience with that. And what I really noticed with Nevada is, one, they're white lines, so you know exactly where they're going to dig. 2, they have a public utility commission that enforces really on both sides of the fence. They don't take any prisoners down there. They kind of keep that on an even keel. So as a locator and as a manager down there, I appreciate it. It was tough. It was really tough, but it did prevent damages and it did create an efficiency.
Yeah, I think Nevada's a classic example, Bill, of a state that's, and all the stakeholders for that matter, that have said, okay, this has got to stop. And every stakeholder has gotten involved there so that the culture in which you talk about is established. And you can see that from the periphery. I see that just from social media. The stakeholders that are active on like LinkedIn, they're talking about stuff they're doing all the time in the state. And it shows that if you organizationally at all levels have the willpower to do it within the existing framework, it can be done. It just is a matter of, do you want to put the effort and to some degree the investment into doing it?
All right, thank you. We have a question from an audience member. Name, company name, and what you do, please.
Hey everybody, Adam Sachiri, sub-training consulting group Locating Dynamics. We do utility locator training certification, accredited nationwide. This one might be a bit of a monkey wrench, might cause a little bit of conversation. Could be a good idea, could be a terrible idea, but we're talking about new ideas, right? So I figured I'd throw this out there. So something that I've seen in California, a gas leak repair crew will have personnel on the excavation crew that are OQ'd for what's called a crew locate. It's a different OQ than production, where they'll actually use a split box, a pipe horn, or something like that to validate the marks prior to breaking ground to fix the gas leak repair. It just gets it more on target, right? So what if we took that concept and started requiring excavators to validate marks prior to breaking ground as part of the process, like a system enhancement, if you will?
Oil and gas, they do that already, and I really liked it. And that's where I started, is in the oil and gas industry, and a lot of the facility owners out there adapted it, and then it just kind of spread, and everyone does it out there now. I think it makes a huge difference, but it's not a law. It's just kind of a practice that is happening in the oil and gas industry. But I think it'd be great, but it's implementing it.
Yeah, I love the idea personally. Like, we're talking about 10 years, 100 years from now. Could this become commonplace? If we're talking about actual damage prevention, lines don't damage themselves. They're caused by excavation activity. So why not include the excavator as a final step?
Yeah, the check and balance, if you will, the final check and balance.
Because, and I'll take the devil's advocacy role on this, because that excavator is working for, in most cases, a single utility. And there's other utilities that are there that they would need to verify. And you can't access certain areas of that utility because that's trespassing onto their system. There's
You're talking about just a basic sweep, though, right?
Yeah,
Pop horn, or just kind of.
They're validating marks.
yeah. I mean, I think it's a great idea, but there could be pushback.
Please. Okay. And then if there's an issue, there should be a mechanism, in my opinion, back to the utility owner to kick off maybe a field meet or something like that if the marks are wrong.
Yeah,
I
I
love
think, the facility owner's not gonna let you go out and mark their line.
Right.
But if you're just validating and you find something, say, hey, I'm picking something up right here, it could save your own life if you're the expert.
Exactly.
That's right.
Thank you for that question. So, economics 101 tells us if something is underpriced, people overconsume, right? They'll consume more than they need. And if something is free, they grossly overconsume, right? If I walk in here and there's someone selling Krispy Kreme donuts for $3 each, I'm probably not going to buy it because, I don't need it. And
I will.
I don't need it, but if it's 25 cents, I'll probably buy a couple. If it's free, I'm grabbing a 6-pack or a 12-pack, and I'm going to eat 6 and then give 6 to the squirrels outside, right? The 811 service is free right now for callers, and I understand the history of why, right? What about the idea of charging some nominal amount, not $75, right? $1, right? $1.50, so that when people call in, when people refresh the ticket that started 9 months ago and that they finished a project 4 months ago, and there's someone in office still refreshing it, they think twice. And there's just people think twice before they call in tickets that they really don't need. They probably don't need, but they're calling right now because it's free. They're picking up the Krispy Kreme donut because it's free, right? So now it's 25 cents or 50 cents. What about that idea?
I don't think that idea would float necessarily right away because of access concerns, right? Yeah. But I think
Because
you could
people don't
take-
have 50 cents?
Well, no, because I think that would be an excuse potentially for people not to participate no matter what. Now, I think I agree that there is some worthiness there of the topic, but why don't we take a look and again take a look at what we have now, right? Which is, for instance, every one of these call centers has the ability to look at data, and you can flag data using any kind of mechanism, even with the most simplistic system. So if you have a ticket that's been refreshed over and over and over again, well, not that you're not going to accept that ticket, but maybe have a liaison look into it and say, hey, does this need to be refreshed every night? Do you know this is happening every 9 months, that kind of thing? And just to, again, be more proactive and try to get out in front of flags that you may see as a state that, okay, this doesn't look right. Let's just verify this to some degree. Now, again, free is free, to your point, Jimmy, and I think that's a very worthy statement. But I see the hill as far as charging for tickets in any fashion, one of those things that is an aspirational goal, but I don't know how realistic it is beyond that within the next 5 years if you want to make some immediate change.
I think a lot of people are using the system properly. So we don't want to punish the people that are using it the way it's intended. So
Right.
maybe, penalize the people that are abusing it. Maybe a more of a penalty if you're calling in tickets,
Right.
Abusing the system.
And education, if anything, right? Just like organizations will do when they have known excavators are given them issues. They're documenting these incidences. If they're doing their job, they're looking at what trends are, and they're going out and making a proactive educational, maybe they're going to their office to do a visit, maybe they're going on site to do a visit, but they're doing things proactively because they know, hey, we've got a negative trend here that we've spotted in the data that we have.
Yeah, the example is the caller that
Right.
every Saturday has that same call. So for 52 Saturdays or whatever that might be, you're going to have potentially have a charge. Well, if I'm going to charge you $52, is that going to end my day? No, it's not. But does that make it enough of a pain where I don't want to have to deal with it? And I know to your donut point, I mentally, the $52 isn't going to crush me, but the process is. And so if I don't want to deal with the process, I might become more conscious about, okay, well, maybe I don't want to do that. And Jimmy, I think you brought up a point that I've kind of been harping on for a while, and I think it's an unpopular point, but as a former locator, I couldn't get to all of those tickets. What if, as a locator, I had to pay the member code? What as an excavator, I didn't excavate within the right way, and I had to pay the code? What if we, instead of the customer talk that you had, what if we're all customers? What if every one of us are now customers and we all have a vested interest in doing what's right? Do we then become better at doing what's right and on time and the correct way? And do we all become better because of it?
I think that's a major part of my point is that there certain stakeholders are not customers right now. And when you're not a customer, first, you're not treated well, as I think one of you guys said. And second is you might behave in a way that a customer would not behave in. We have a question from the audience.
Just to Dwayne Bridges, on before, to reinforce what Jimmy was saying about stake in this. I know when USAN converted from one call system to another, they didn't transfer the tickets, the renewals. That was like 100,000 tickets. Do you know how many of those tickets actually got put into the new system? Like less than 1%. So what was happening, exactly what we're talking about, people were just refreshing these tickets because some girl had been told every Monday morning, refresh 300 tickets. And you go, wow, that's just an abuse.
Free donut.
It's a free donut. That is a free donut. And so I do love this idea that you get a free donut, you get one, maybe you get two. You don't get 3, 4, 5, or 6, right? Maybe those 3, 4, 5, and 6 cost you $5 to have that renewal ticket. And that would change. Now we're starting to see some change because the process, not the dollars. The dollars are just a hassle. I've got to go and pay for this, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So I think it's great. I really like that idea a lot.
Thank you. Do we have more time for questions, Connor? Or are we... Okay. So, I guess back to Bill. Bill, anything else you've heard? What about the idea? Do you see a lot of tickets that you and your team perform, locate that maybe you go back afterwards, you're refreshing, right? You're refresh before the law change. Every 14 days you go refresh because they call it a refresh ticket, and there's no activity there. Like, is that pretty common?
I don't know. It's hard to say if it's common or not, to be honest with you, because these projects are so big, but there's quite a few. I would say there's quite a few. But again, I think it gets down to 811 and their practices, because in 811, when they're asking this operator, are you continuing excavation? And the operator's saying yes, you know, they have a provision for right side locating to go after a contractor and say, look, you know, every time we go back and refresh that, it's 3 hours of our time to refresh it. We're able to bill you at a private locate rate now. But the problem, I guess, with that is, you know, there's no clear pathway to that. You know, you're gonna have to take somebody to small claims court, go through all this rigmarole for $300, $400, and really it's the time. You know, I just feel like the pathway really is the culture for the excavator, the culture for the line locating, utility commission, everybody kind of getting in there and getting the job done. You know, I'll give you one story. I had a former locator work for me. She took on a project manager role and with a fiber company. So she was rolling into these neighborhoods and calling in tickets. And so she would break the tickets up, you know, one ticket for this side of the street, one ticket for this side of the street, one ticket for this intersection. She quickly had members approaching her and saying, why are you calling in all these tickets? We got to pay for those. You know, you can do all this with one ticket. And she wanted to control her project. When she was done, she wanted not to be able to update that ticket and just move on to this one. So there was pressure there, you know, and it is, you know, I understand dollars and cents and running a business, but yeah, it's just a culture change. I feel like it needs to take place.
Great, thank you, Bill. We have a question from LinkedIn. Felix, PSEG. Question. What motivation do excavators have to dig safely other than avoiding fines? Most excavators want to work fast and do not want to be slowed down by calling in update tickets and vacuum X or soft/hand digs. Is there anyone who has incentive-based structure to encourage safe digging practices? I guess other than potentially killing himself, but
Well, that's the obvious, right? Yeah. Self-protection.
Yeah, PSE&G, obviously electric and gas. So you, as an excavator, you run the risk of running into electric lines, running into gas lines. So you're, from a safety perspective, there's your incentive. From a cost perspective, even if it's a minimal damage, it's downtime that I'm going to have to incur because I can't do anything while they're doing something to fix the lines that I damaged. So outside of that, what's the incentive? There is none.
so let me rephrase Felix's very good question a little. Isn't that at the core of a lot of the, you know, I think it was 25-30% of the damages that in the dirt report that did not have a ticket called in, did not have a valid ticket, is I have a project to do, I have liquidated damages, and if I don't get it done, my family doesn't eat, and I can't pay my employees, and there's serious problems. And if I call in a ticket, as we saw in the last CJ dirt report, almost 50% of tickets are late, have one or more members who are late, so they cannot start on time. So if I call in a ticket, it's going to be late. And even if it's not late, it may be incomplete. So I'm going to roll the dice. Isn't that at the heart of a lot of this, you know, no tickets or insufficient ticket or whatever?
It is, and I think, you know, that's in that particular problem that you bring up, Jimmy, is definitely a valid real world issue to think about. And I think that there's been things that have been done. I know Canada has actually started to empower excavators more because they had such an issue with late locates and manpower issues and things like that, where they have changed things to the point where now the excavator can, through a process, have their own locator go out and locate the facility, so they don't have to wait for the facility owner or their contractor to locate the facility. So again, that was a situation that was looked at and solved through a real world solution that now you have, you know, empowered, certified excavators. There's a process they have to go through in order to be able to do this. But now they are now empowered to manage their own work largely and still stay within the law and safety.
Thank you. And on that note, we'll have to end this. Can we give this fine panel a round of applause? Thanks to all who turned in on LinkedIn, and Bill, appreciate your input. I wasn't trying to single you out, but the industry values tremendously your perspective as the frontline guy who has to deal with everything else we do. So thank you for everyone who's joining in. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Jimmy.